What do you want to be when you grow up? That's the question George asked his grandkids as they scrunched over a puzzle in their home library. They took a second, looked around, and broke knowing smiles as the answer came simultaneously to their minds. In unison, they told him, "We want to be famous." George stared at the puzzle, but he wasn't looking for matching pieces. "Is that really what you want?" George asked. "Of course," they answered. If that was really the case, George said, then he had a story to tell them. Grandpa's stories were always the best, so the kids grabbed throw pillows and nestled into different positions all over the couches. George dimmed the lights and lit a candle that looked more like a rogue volcano of wax. "Are you ready?" he asked. The flicker of the flame brought life to the shadows around the room. A few danced across George's cheeks as he began. "Good. Then let me tell you about a former employee of mine, Jarrod. Jarrod in the Institute." Welcome to the second episode of the Nameless Stories podcast. This episode is based on the original short story, Galisi Institute. To find the original short story, you can visit us on our website at namelessstories.com or follow us on YouTube or Instagram at nameless.stories. If you enjoy this episode, please consider sharing it, leaving us a review or comment with your thoughts, or following us on any of our platforms. This week, we bring you the story of Jarrod, an ambitious journalist who recently got into hot water for a story he broke. Follow us for part 1 of 2 as Jarrod goes undercover to redeem himself and figure out what's happening at a suspicious new mental health clinic. And now, Galisi Institute, a nameless story. Jarrod was nervous when he stepped into Mr. Schultz's office, or George, as he kept reminding him to call him. He sat down, and they both stared at each other as if expecting the other to start the meeting. Jarrod never used to struggle with silence, but now, he couldn't stand it. "I'm sorry, George," he began the meeting. "If this is about Allison Richards again." George interrupted him. He told him to stop talking about Allison Richards, that everyone had said what they said and nothing was changing. He had called the meeting for much different reasons. He asked Jarrod if he had heard about Galisi Institute. At first, it didn't ring a bell. But when George described it as the mysterious new construction in the mountains, Jarrod knew it immediately. Apparently, it was some new mental health clinic helping patients who had mental health issues resulting from recent criticism or something like that. They hadn't returned any of George's calls, which he thought was suspicious. What kind of mental health clinic wouldn't take an opportunity to let the community know about all the good they were doing? So, George asked Jarrod to go undercover. Jarrod was hesitant at first. He had been a little off his game since everything happened, but he accepted the assignment and made plans to get himself into the clinic as a patient a week later. Galisi Institute was a strange building. It looked like a castle, but a bizarre modern one with glass walls between rock towers, almost like a modern California home set in the medieval period. It sat in a high valley with mountains all around it that hid it well from the road. When Jarrod arrived, a woman named Tina greeted him at the door and showed him around the building. She described it similarly as George had, a clinic dealing specifically with people facing mental health issues after some significant criticism or embarrassment. She emphasized that their facilities and techniques were state-of-the-art. But when Jarrod asked what treatment entailed for their patients, she joked around that that was what he was there to find out. Jarrod laughed, knowing it was just a joke, but it stirred those nerves in him that he always felt at the beginning of assignments. A fear that everyone knew exactly why he was really there. The rest of the tour went quick. There wasn't much to see in the building. It had a ground floor and a basement that mostly consisted of staff offices and client suites. The strangest part about the place, aside from the mix of modern and medieval architecture, was that each room was in its own little unit with a private cafeteria attached. Jarrod asked about it, but Tina explained that many of their clients felt uncomfortable being around other people at this time in their lives. She told him he might see other patients in the halls from time to time, but for the most part, his time there would be private. By the time they finished the tour, it was pretty late. Jarrod had spent most of his day driving up to the Institute after work, so he bypassed dinner altogether, found his suite, and headed to bed. The next morning, Jarrod met Marlena in her office. She had kind eyes and long black hair, and she explained that she would be his psychologist during his time there. She emphasized that if he ever had any issues during his stay, he could always come to her or Tina. After some chit-chat, Marlena coached Jarrod through some paperwork and spent the rest of their session getting to know each other better. She told him they could start with the boring stuff, how many siblings he had, what his parents did, but what she was most interested to know was who is Jarrod Harris? Jarrod had never been asked a question like that before. He took a minute, but he eventually settled on an answer. He told her he was a journalist. That didn't seem to satisfy Marlena, however. She wanted to know more. Jarrod kept thinking, and he added that he was a son, a friend, 32 years old, 5'9", and eventually shrugged as if asking her what else she wanted to know. Marlena kept looking at Jarrod and told him to go deeper. She wanted to know something she couldn't tell just from looking at him or reading his resume. She made him sit there and keep thinking until he came up with something deeper. Jarrod thought and eventually settled on a single, two-word phrase. He told her he was a good guy. Marlena seemed to finally accept the answer as she made her first scribbles in her notepad. As she wrote, Jarrod took the moment of silence to turn the question back on her. Marlena smiled at his attempted role reversal and quickly rattled off that she was also a good person. She added that she also cared about helping others, that she was also fun, creative, and with a laugh, told Jarrod that her friends might describe her as a little bit crazy sometimes. Jarrod continued with the questions and asked about her credentials, how long she had been working at the Institute, where she went to school, and other basic info he figured he'd need for whatever story he ended up writing. They went back and forth for a few hours, continuing to get to know each other, but when the session finally ended and Jarrod returned to his room, he collapsed on the bed immediately. Although it was just a get-to-know-you session, and they had hardly begun real therapy, it felt more like a skilled dance he had to learn the steps to. He was trying to extract as much information from Marlena as he could, while also giving her just enough information about himself for their session to seem real without turning into actual therapy. His mind was exhausted, and so he fell asleep. Jarrod woke up when 3 heavy knocks struck his door. It was Tina, and he was shocked to find that he had napped for 5 hours and missed dinner. Tina explained that she didn't want him to starve, however, so she had brought dinner to him. She carried a tray loaded with food and 3 tall glasses filled to the brim with liquids that looked like juice, but tasted like chemicals. Jarrod didn't drink more than a teaspoon from the glasses. But when Tina returned an hour later, she explained that the drinks were a doctor's orders kind of thing. Apparently, they were an in-house concoction filled with vitamins that were meant to help Jarrod get the most out of his time at the Institute. Not wanting to bring any undue suspicion upon his shoulders or his purpose there, Jarrod downed the drinks with a grimace. Tina left satisfied, and Jarrod waited for the 9 p.m. curfew to pass. It was time he did some real investigating. As midnight rolled around and he assumed everyone would be asleep, he got his camera and began to roam the halls. They were quiet, empty. It gave him the perfect opportunity to see what else was hidden in the castle. Unfortunately, however, the ground floor seemed no different at night than it did during the day. He tried the knobs of a few office doors, but everything was locked. He eventually gave up on the ground floor and decided it was time to venture to the basement. He got a couple hallways deep into the basement when suddenly, he heard the first footsteps of the night. Worried of the consequences being caught out and about past curfew, Jarrod tried to backtrack, but it was too late. A man turned the corner ahead, but he whipped around so quickly when he saw Jarrod that Jarrod didn't even get a chance to see his face. All he saw was the white blur of his lab coat flashing in, then out of sight. Jarrod panicked. He tried to hide his camera and waited for someone to come chastise him for being out past curfew. But a minute passed, and then another, and no one came. Eventually, Jarrod unfroze and decided to go take a turn down the hall the man had come from. Jarrod half expected to find an army of orderlies there ready to restrain him, but what he actually found was entirely different. All the doors Jarrod had seen at the Institute so far were brown, and as far as he could tell, made from wood. But the doorway at the end of this hall was a gray metal door that looked like it belonged more in a bank vault than a mental health clinic. However, even stranger than the material the door was made out of was the lone security camera pointing at it. Jarrod had been keeping his eye out for security cameras, hoping to make sure that no one would see him sneaking around past curfew. And he hadn't seen a single one anywhere in the building. But all of a sudden, there one was in the middle of the basement, pointed at this strange door. Jarrod investigated the door as much as he could without coming into the view of the camera. He snapped a few dozen shots before starting to worry that someone might open the door and catch him any second. So, content with his progress for the night, Jarrod returned to his room and fell asleep. That was the end of his night. He didn't remember dreaming or anything else happening. But when he woke up the next day, he woke up in a sweat. "Why are you here, Jarrod?" That's what Marlena asked him as they sat on benches at a scenic overlook of the valley. They had spent all morning hiking there as a special location for his second session. The question got Jarrod nervous, again, like she knew why he was really there, but he figured it was probably just his own paranoia acting up. Again, Marlena wasn't satisfied with his first answer, so she asked him again, "Why are you here?" Jarrod rubbed his knees and eventually answered that he was there because of some professional turmoil from a story he had recently published. Marlena could tell he was getting anxious, so she asked him to forget that she was a therapist. She said to forget that he was even at the Institute and pretend that she was just a friend, someone he was just out in nature with, talking about life. Marlena asked Jarrod to explain what professional turmoil he had been experiencing recently, but instead, Jarrod just asked, "Don't you know already?" Truthfully, Marlena did know what had happened to Jarrod. She knew it even before she read it in his application to the Institute. Everyone in the state knew it, and probably more. So, she just asked him to pretend she had been living under a rock and tell the story fresh. Jarrod took a deep breath and rubbed his knees again. He debated if he actually needed to tell her the story. It felt too much like getting into real therapy. But the more he thought, the more he realized he would have to tell her this story. If he ever wanted to find out what was really going on at the Institute, what was behind that door, he would have to at least be honest with her about this. There was no way she would see him as a real patient otherwise. So, he began. He explained that he was a journalist at Westham, and a good one. He had more leading stories than anyone else in Westham history by his age, but he wanted more. He needed a real story, one that would make him a household name one day. So, Jarrod explained that when famous CEO Alison Richard chose little old Brisbane in his home state to build her new factory, he saw his opportunity. He figured that anyone with the influence of her company bringing such a large factory to such a little, inconvenient town was at best exploiting the community for cheap labor, or at worst, hiding something. Jarrod did some digging. At first, nothing was sticking, but then he asked a Brisbane doctor if he had seen an increase in any health issues since the factory. The doctor said that, come to think of it, there had been an increase in pulmonary issues since the factory came in. The news was like candy to Jarrod's ears. He hired a geologist from an environmental protection agency to come do some testing, and lo and behold, everything near the factory lit up in the tests. The whole town was practically poisoned. Jarrod explained that because he was worried what might happen if he let the factory stay open any longer, he ran the story immediately. It caught on like wildfire. Next thing he knew, everyone wanted to interview him. The factory shut down pending further investigation, and suffice it to say, Allison Richard wasn't so beloved anymore. Jarrod enjoyed his little rise to the top of the journalistic world, but it all came crashing down a few months later. The independent investigations finally concluded, and it turned out that everything was clean. The air, the ground, the water, they were all perfect. Long story short, it turned out that the person Jarrod had hired to do the tests was a disgraced geology professor who had been fired for who knows what. Even worse, the doctor that Jarrod had spoken to had failed to mention that the increase in pulmonary issues coincided exactly with flu season. Once everything came to light, the factory reopened and things returned to normal for Brisberry. But not for Jarrod. Article after article went out about his failure, and next thing he knew, he was getting accused of everything from falsifying documents to violating HIPAA laws and even international conspiracy. Marlena asked Jarrod what happened after that, and he told her it was just a lot of hate. People dragging his name through the mud, saying he should be fired, in jail, and even a fair amount of death threats. Jarrod explained that Weston was nice enough to keep him on, but he wasn't sure he belonged there anymore. Everyone was nice enough not to talk about what happened, but he could tell from their phony smiles and fake politeness what they really thought. That he hurt the paper's reputation, and that he shouldn't be there anymore. Jarrod looked off into the distance. He told Marlena that sometimes he wondered if it would be better if he just... and he trailed off. Disappeared? Marlena finished the sentence for him. Or something like that, Jarrod added. Maybe you should just disappear or something, Marlena said. Jarrod looked at her with wide eyes, as if suddenly realizing he had been talking to an alien. Oh, I see, he said. Reverse psychology. Is this one of those state-of-the-art techniques you use? I was starting to wonder when they'd show up. Just talking about my feelings in nature didn't really seem cutting edge. No offense. None taken, Marlena answered. None taken whatsoever. I agree the hiking is more of an old-school method. The fresh air up here always has a way of opening people up. But trust me, the Institute has plenty of state-of-the-art methods. I'm sure we'll use some later on. Jarrod just nodded and slunk back into the bench as he waited for Marlena's next question. It didn't come. She had turned away from Jarrod entirely and seemed to be perfectly blissful, staring out over the valley. Jarrod stared with her and tried to find a piece of her bliss. He imagined a bird flying over the valley. How sweet it would be to leap off that cliff and fly over the valley truly free. But he knew he couldn't. He knew he had to stay on the ground. He just wanted help to do so. So, what do you think? He asked Marlena, once she seemed to have drifted from their conversation and into an entirely different realm. She stayed in her realm a bit longer. A beautiful breeze, neither warm nor chilly, rolled over the hills. It's beautiful, isn't it? She finally said. Nature. It's just so pure, undefiled, beautiful. It couldn't do wrong even if it wanted to. It just is. She closed her eyes and shook her head slowly. We don't deserve it. Jarrod just nodded again. He agreed with her, but the thought didn't give him the same feeling of bliss. Actually, he felt quite sick, like the one wormhole in an otherwise perfect apple. Can we go? He asked. Sure, Jarrod, Marlena told him. They ended their session early that day. Jarrod ate in his personal cafeteria that night. It felt strange. Back home, he always had a friend to get dinner with, or a TV. In that awkward, isolated room, however, The only distraction was the sound of his own chewing. It wasn't much, but at least it was better than his thoughts. Drinking those 3 mandatory vitamin drinks worked even better to distract him, like pinching himself after stubbing his toe. But getting back to work and going out to investigate again would be the best distraction. Or at least, he thought it would be. The halls seemed darker that night as he began his post-curfew prowling, and even quieter than the day before. Or maybe, was his mind just louder? He went to the metal door and took more pictures. It was the same as before, full of mystery, void of answers. Answers he knew he would not find by taking more pictures. It was time to look elsewhere. He went to the main entrance, a wide open space bigger than any other in the building. That was a mistake. There was just something about the emptiness of the room, and that silence, that awful silence. His heart started to pound. He made his way to the sweeping front doors. They were so locked that they pushed him back when he tried to open them. Of course, no one was at the reception desk either. He picked up the phone and mashed a few buttons. Nothing. Not even a dial tone. He tried the Westham office number. Silence. His mom? Silence. The room began closing in on him. His breaths started to shorten, getting faster and faster until it seemed they might stop altogether. "Hello?" he hollered into the emptiness. "Tina?" He begged for her to answer. Even if it was well past curfew, he didn't mind getting caught anymore. But the building mirrored the phones. Silent. He couldn't take it anymore. His fingers pounded the button so hard it would have broken any lesser machine. 911. But still, there was nothing. If this scene were a movie, the camera would zoom out to show Jarrod alone in the open space, his chest heaving as trombones thundered in the background, or maybe just the haunting echo of a cymbal. His brain barreled down one track like a train with no brake system and an end destination of panic. And then, he saw her. She glided noiselessly into the foyer, like a ghost. Not Marlena, not Tina, not another doctor. She was perhaps the last person he could have expected to see. He just stared at her and asked, "Allison?" Thank you for listening to part 1 of Galisi Institute. Next time, we'll continue with the story of Jarrod as he talks with Allison and keeps unraveling the mysteries of the building. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving us a review or sharing it with a friend. As always, if you want to see more of our content or read the full original short story, visit us at namelessstories.com. You can also find us on YouTube or Instagram at nameless.stories. Lastly, this has been Galisi Institute, a nameless story.